We've got a minute over time. This session takes us through to 1 p.m. Similar format to this morning. We've got 4 panelists and we'll do a few rounds of questions, but we've got a different focus now. So we'll let them introduce themselves and give you a sense of the type of organisation they're working with, but we're then going to get into the whole world of training and development and different approaches to building skills and capacity and all the rest of it. So I think we can stop sharing the slide now, Francis. Thank you very much. So just to repeat, for those who don't know, I'm Glenn Poole from the Australian Men's Health Forum. This is Men's Health Connected, and today is the Men's Mental Health Meetup. And in this session, we are asking the question, do you need training to talk to blokes, and how do you upskill your volunteers? So we've got Jack Jones from the Banksia Project, Ian Westmoreland from Mentoring Men, Stephen Gamble from Men Anchor, and John Morgan from Marcus Mission. And I'm just going to start first, guys, by giving you a minute or two just to basically ask the very simple question, who the hell are you? What's your project and what does it do, before we get into the conversation around training? I think that's you, Bob. So just a reminder there to try and keep your microphones off. We can mute you if need be, but if you can try and keep your microphones off, it really helps, and use the chat box to talk to each other. So we'll come first. I think we'll go in this order, guys. We're going to just go Jack, Ian, Steve, John. Okay, so Jack, you're first.
Perfect. Firstly, thank you for having me, and thanks for everyone who's here today. It's pretty phenomenal to see this many blokes that want to talk about this sort of stuff on a long weekend and see how we can all work together. Who I am, I think, is really important to respond to. Say, I'm a good friend, a good family member. I like spending time down at the beach. You know, I enjoy keeping myself fit, healthy, and active. And sometimes I also run a mental health charity. And so I think that's really valuable. I am separate to the organisation, and I have my own wellbeing and health and value. And I also run a mental health charity. So the Banksia Project focuses on early intervention and prevention in men's mental health. It's all about giving blokes the skills they need before crisis, rather than waiting for it to occur. We train local facilitators to support their own community, and we just give them the skills and the framework. All of our programs are run by volunteers, and they can be anywhere across the country. All we have to do is take them through a day's training, which is what we're offering for this conversation, is to say, well, what does the training entail? And then we get them to support their own community and empower their own groups. And we just support them in doing that. The last thing that we do that's slightly different to a lot of the organisations here is we provide clinical support. So any of our volunteers, they're everyday blokes. They're having chats with everyday blokes. But if some of the people in that room are, you know, suffering from a little bit more complex mental health challenges, there's an on-call clinician at the end of every program. So our facilitators can call that clinician and say, look, I'm sitting here with Jack. He's having a bit of a struggle tonight, and we'd love to get you a chat with him to make sure that we've got that safety net. But we run men's groups, about 8 to 10, predominantly New South Wales based, but now with COVID, we've set up virtual rooms, and they're all across the country.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Good introduction. So we'll move to Ian Westmoreland, Mentoring Men.
Thanks, Glenn, and thanks everyone for this opportunity. So my name's Ian. I'm a father, a husband. I've got 4 kids, and we just had our 10th grandchild about 3 weeks ago. So just a bit of my story. On the 10th of September 2013, I had a life-changing moment that it resulted in me leaving a job as an IT manager and becoming a volunteer mentor. And it's been a real learning curve for me. And a couple of years ago, I realised there was a huge gap in the mentoring landscape in Australia, in that there was no freely available mentoring program for men. So we launched Mentoring Men back in November 2018. So we're a not-for-profit organisation, and our core service is having a trained volunteer mentor provide free one-on-one, we call it life mentoring. It's not business, it's on life to another man. Our mission is supporting men in their life journey. All men, regardless of their background or beliefs, are welcome to apply for our program. And our mentors are all volunteers, and they bring different skills and knowledge to positively impact the wellbeing of Australian men. We've been going for about 18 months and we've already got over 200 men engaged in the program. It's rapidly growing. Under COVID, it's now gone national. So really exciting times. And I can't believe that an organisation like this didn't exist before. There's heaps of mentoring programs for kids. There's programs for women. But as far as I know, we're the only widely available free mentoring program for men. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thanks for being here, Ian, and looking forward to hearing more about what you've been up to throughout the conversation. So we'll come to Steve of Mananka.
Unmute. Hi, everyone. Hi, Glenn. Thank you very much. I'm really honoured to be here. It's a fantastic opportunity to network with some other brilliant people doing some magical things in the mental health space and the men's health area. So my name's Stephen Gamble and I founded Mananka in 2017. I hate using the word founded because it makes me sound like a complete wanker. I promise you I'm not a wanker. I'm a really nice, genuine guy. But I started Mananka with the hope of, making men stop for a brief second and think about their own well-being as well as the well-being of the people around them. And we started off on social media, and I thought if I could stop someone and make them think from a message about themselves, maybe that could, kind of prompt some positive change in someone's life. And so from there, we've turned into an education and awareness program that now works on early intervention or prevention, early intervention and treatment pathways. We run a number of different programs and we work from community groups and sporting groups to large corporates like banks and so on about providing, removing barriers and providing education. We believe in engage, educate and empowering the community to have conversations around mental health. And with that, you use knowledge and that opens up doors and removes those barriers and perceived stigmas. So we've been doing it now since 2017 and we're only a small organisation compared to the other organisations on here, but I think we've got good reach and good impact. But as I said, it's really wonderful to be here with you all today. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for being here, Steve. And the naughty part of my brain is now trying to work out a limerick. I've got the first two lines about the man from Mananka who definitely isn't a wanker. If anyone else can complete that limerick today, there might be a prize.
Okay.
So, I might regret saying that. But it's Saturday, so let's see what we can come up with. And finally, for this first round of questions, to John from Marcus Mission.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm actually a proud wanker too because I am the co-founder and group facilitator of Marcus Mission, and thanks to, and I love what you said about engage, educate and empower because that's very much along the same lines as us. So about 5.5 years ago, we lost our nephew who was living with us at the time, who died by suicide. And kind of the question we asked is, what did we miss? What wasn't wrapped around him enough? What wasn't something that was useful? And what we found was that he, as a 23-year-old, he didn't engage really well with clinical support. And so we developed a social support model, which has sort of three main parts to it. The typical suicide prevention training for the community as a whole. But also what we did is we wanted to educate and upskill mentors so that they were in a really good, competent position to be able to help men that were facing life's challenges, as well as helping men that are challenged as well. So we've sort of got the resilience building workshops, which we do a lot of work, and that's my background, 27 years as a corporate facilitator. So doing some work on know yourself, your thinking styles, distorted thinking patterns, beliefs, and so forth, masculinity norms. So doing something like that. The second one, knowing others. So relationship skills, conflict skills, empathy, listening, and then finally sort of knowing your future, optimism, life balance, and sort of making some plans from there. But all of the content and the processes involved in those workshops, whether they're for mentors or men facing challenges, all activity based. So lots of time where you go out and chuck a footy and have a chat. But the other thing, they're all based on the evidence of those situational factors that are the key triggers for suicide ideation for men. So, you know, conflict, relationship breakdown, financial issues, long-term illness, and so forth. And we've been going for 2 years, and we've got sort of 5 areas. Gold Coast was our starting point a couple of years ago, Bundaberg, Sunshine Coast recently, Lockyer Valley, Darling Downs, all in that sort of regional area of southeast Queensland.
Great.
Thanks, mate.
Oh, thanks for being here, John. So you've got a sense of who we've got in the room. But there's 4 different organisations, different areas of the country, slightly different focus, all fitting in the world of our men's mental health movement, and you know, different sizes and different focus. But it doesn't matter how big or small you are. We can never have enough skills, right? And particularly as we start to build a team of people, we want to really make sure. I remember Jez saying in the first session, and Jez is definitely an anchor officially, or a co-anchor. I can't remember which one it is. Jez was saying in the first session, you know, when he first started to employ other people, it was like, you know, his worries were they doing what he was doing? Were they doing 15 hours a day? Were they approaching things exactly the same as he was? And of course, I think the reason we've positioned this conversation here after the founders is because so many of us are doing most of this or a lot of this on our own. And so the training piece isn't just about us getting better and more skilled at what we do, but it's also about building a team that can do stuff really well and building a community that's really skilled up. So for this next round, what I'm going to do, and I think we'll go, we'll start with Jack, and then we'll go. We'll just actually tell you what. We'll keep the same order. It seems to it works nicely. So what I want you to do is take a good 5 or 6 minutes here and tell us about your approach to training. You know, yourselves, your staff, your volunteers, and even the broader community. However you're doing that. Okay.
Amazing. So I think first for us to be clear, we don't have a whole lot of staff. It's basically me. We've got 1 or 2 others, but they don't deal with any participant sides. They might help with some of the corporate partnerships we're trying to develop and things like that. But so in terms of on the ground staff, it's me. Whether that's a lucky thing or an unlucky thing, I'll let you guys decide. But what I guess that makes it really important that our point of difference is our volunteers. How we deliver our programs and everything that we do, our touch points to the community, is our volunteers. And so I really want to make sure that they've got everything they need to express the message, express the values that Banksia is trying to create in the community, and make them feel empowered to do that. And I think what's really important that I focus on when we're running those trainings is all of our programs are designed and overseen by clinicians. All of our modules that we actually teach our guys on how to, you know, our learning modules on, you know, exercise or discussing emotions or forgiveness, regret, a whole range of things are designed by mental health clinicians. But the impact of that is coming from a peer. So we need to make those peers really comfortable in saying, this is how you can learn about those things. So we want to make sure they understand them. In our peers training or our facilitator training course, which is entirely free, we want these guys to understand their own mental health and wellbeing first and foremost. If they don't understand the practices and the principles that we're trying to teach our participants, well, it's never going to transfer effectively. So our volunteer training day is a really hybrid approach of saying, we want to understand about mental health and wellbeing in a dry learning capacity and how that relates to other people, but also yourself and how you actually apply those skills. What we also do on that volunteer training day is we almost get a proof of concept. So we bring a group of strangers who are 12, 13 blokes together. And as any 12, 13 blokes together, you come together and everyone's a little bit reserved and resistant to what's about to happen. And instantly, I've never had a training day where people just don't start sharing entirely about the challenges they're facing, what they've gone through in the past. And it is phenomenal to witness. And so for us, that's a real proof of concept in that training session to say, well, you were all strangers and you've all just come together and proved what we're trying to do in our growth rooms in the community. So that is a really important part of our training. Some of the other aspects that I believe are really important is we want to make sure those people are safe. So in our training, we've actually got a clinician on hand to make sure in an observational setting to say, we want to make sure those volunteers aren't in a vulnerable space. because if they're in a vulnerable mental health setting, and we're putting them to run programs for our community, that could be really challenging for them or for the people in the program. So we actually spend quite a lot of time vetting them with clinicians to make sure that they're in a stable, healthy, and well position. So they're then empowered to go and help their community. The other thing that we do is we make sure that they understand the process of, we have referral clinicians available, and there's debriefs after our growth rooms to make sure that they're feeling safe as well. So having that, their understanding that what their role is as a facilitator, and probably most importantly, what it isn't. One of our most important facets of the Banksia Project is we're not mental health clinicians, and we don't want to be. So if people in the program are displaying certain characteristics that probably lead towards a complex challenge, we want to make sure our volunteers know that's not their space. We're more of a triage. We want to pick up some signs and early warning signs, hopefully prevent those signs, but obviously understand what they look like and what they might look like for different people. And then most importantly, understand what's that referral pathway, so that our volunteers aren't stepping over that mark, and that our participants have that clear referral pathway to a clinician if needed. I think most importantly, the reason we do that, and this whole training, for me, it's about, if we're poking the bear and we're, starting the fire of talking about mental health and wellbeing, which is in a positive way, but can lead to some challenges, we want to make sure there's some real safety networks available. So some of the skills we teach our participants in the program are about, particular nuances of conversation to make sure we're not going into details of trauma, or to make sure we're not letting anyone in the program prescribe solutions, or in traditional male fashion go into fix-it mode, which we all do. But we want to make sure they're not doing that in this program, because that carries a whole lot of risk for them as an individual, for the participants as individuals, and for the group and the organization. So some of the other skills that we make sure they understand is, how important it is to not problem solve and fix or prescribe. And I guess all of this is, again, designed by our clinicians to say, this is how we keep it safe. Men have a whole pattern of behaviors that are really great in some aspects, but they can be really challenging if we're just trying to provide a safe space for people to talk. We want to make sure we're not, going into that solutions mode, or we're not overstepping that boundary as everyday members of the community. But most importantly, we want to make sure our volunteers feel safe and empowered, and understand what the Banksia Project's principles and values are, and then they can go and put them out in the community. So I know I've just kind of fumbled around a bit. I feel like I didn't make any sense, but for me, I think for us, it's really important for them to feel the heart and soul of what we're doing. So I probably to wrap that up, I use this example a lot in all of our trainings, and a lot of the times I talk. The first time I ever went to my best mate, and he's a lovely bloke, he's a physio by trade, so he's a people person. He's one of the most social people I know. And I said, mate, I've been diagnosed with mental health challenges, depression, and I'm suicidal. And he was a 22-year-old bloke. And he goes, yeah, sorry, mate. Like, I think he's the perfect candidate for one of our facilitators. But traditionally, I don't think most blokes don't have the literacy to actually talk about mental health and well-being. And that's not a discredit to him. He didn't know how to handle that conversation safely. So what we really try and focus on is giving blokes like him the skills to actually say, yep, I'm not going to be your solution. I'm going to sit there and facilitate a safe space for you. I'm going to facilitate a safe group for you. And then most importantly, my role cuts off here. And if you are a little bit more over that mark, we're going to get you straight to the professionals who are trained to deal with those challenges.
Great. Made heaps of sense, Jack. Loads of sense.
Good to hear.
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons I asked you to, in particular, to come onto this panel is because I know that how you've taken that very specific approach from the outset with the development of your groups, and getting that sort of that clinical guidance, but also you're saying we're not clinicians, we're talking about peers here, but we're enabling blokes to help blokes within a framework where we feel we've got the clinical sort of support and backup we need if necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that I probably didn't touch on that I just remembered, you reminded me, Glenn, so thank you, is it's never going to be a one size fits all. We can't say, all right, you go and do this because this is what our facilitators have to go and do, and that's the Banksia Project. You know, for us, we say, look, we think we've got a pretty good setup, but when we go out to say we've got programs running in Dubbo, Orange, we're even looking at Gippsland, in rural Victoria, you know, each community is going to be different. So we want to give those facilitators the tools they need to volunteer, but we also want to empower them with their own skills and their own beliefs, and they can make that fit for their own community. So I think it's really important that they understand the heart and soul and the principles, but most importantly, they can go with their own skills and make that relevant to their community. Because if I go and try and, you know, work directly with people in Dubbo, they're going to go, mate, you live in Maroubra. You know, you have no idea what I'm going through on a day in, day out. So that's one of our really important aspects as well. So thank you for reminding me that, and I'll shut up now.
No, you're very welcome. That was excellent. So and I just want to make the point here that what we're not doing is saying the Banksia approach, for example, is the way that all organisations should do it, or we're going to come
Absolutely.
in a moment that the mentoring men way is the way that all organisations should do it. What this is giving us an opportunity to do is to have a glimpse inside of the approaches that different organisers are using. And if you see something that you think, hey, that's really valuable, grab it. But if you see something you think that's not for us, then that's okay. And so this is about getting an understanding of what different organisations are doing and working out which model is best for you to achieve what you want to achieve.
And the other thing I think as well is I couldn't care less what logo's on it. So
yeah, right.
if someone's just found something I've said useful, you know, hit me up, give me a message, and if I can help and vice versa, I think that's phenomenal. So enough from me.
That's all right. So and then to add to the Limerick competition, in addition to there was a man from Mananka, we've now got there was a young man from Maroubra. If anyone can work with that one in the background, you're also there's also prizes for that too. The prize is a day's training in Maroubra with Jack. So Ian, over to you. So yeah, what's key about your approach? Thinking about your staff, your volunteers, the broader community of men you're trying to work with.
Okay. So all the men engaged in our program are volunteers, and we developed our own mentoring training program. We picked the best out of. I've been involved with 4 other mentoring programs, so we picked those, looked at the best parts, and we've got a pretty impressive training document that covers all the stuff you'd expect on communication, self-care, mental health, and things like that. But I'm often asked, what does it take to be a good mentor to support another man? And look, we can go through all this training stuff. There's a whole lot of stuff around mirroring, reflecting, and all this technical stuff. But to me, it boils down to 2 things. Do you care about another person? And secondly, can you listen? If you can do those 2 things, then you're there. You can support another man. And that's, to me, they're the critical elements of the mentor. So we get into a whole lot of other technical stuff, but it boils down to that. In addition to our training course, and it was always face-to-face, but under COVID, we've now gone virtual. And so our next one's, we run these courses monthly. The next one's in a couple of weeks. So if anyone's interested, let us know. I guess something else that comes out, that's very similar to what Jack said, is vulnerability. We do a talking circle, and you start getting these guys sharing incredibly deeply, and there's this camaraderie that develops amongst the group. I find it incredibly moving. You know, there's often tears involved with this, and it's just great seeing men throw off the facade and actually talk deeply about what they're feeling at that time. And we actually do that as part of ongoing meetings as well. So in addition to our own training course, we also have our mentors attend a Lifeline accidental counsel course or something similar. They're basically a suicide awareness course. We also run fortnightly mentor support sessions, and these support sessions include peer support, so mentors can seek guidance from some of the professionals or from other mentors, and we also do a talking circle within that. And we also have fortnightly men's forums, and these forums cover topics that men don't often talk about. You know, a couple of weeks ago we talked about addiction and with drugs and alcohol or other stuff. Steve Gamble, who's on the panel, gave a great talk a few weeks ago on Man Anchor. We went about an hour over because there was just so many questions. And Glenn Poole, who's chairing this, is going to talk in a few weeks' time. So these men's forums, every fortnight, we run them via Zoom, and they're open to all men to come along, and we welcome that. We actually get guys from overseas dialing in as well. So that's the core of the program, the mentor training, the Lifeline course, and then just ongoing support and development. That's it. Glenn, are you there? Unless there's any questions.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just checking my diary, wondering what I said yes to. Yeah, no, that's excellent. And we'll come back with actually, because I think there's a common theme there with yourselves and Banksia. This thing of because traditionally training has been something that you do at a set time in a room, and then there's the people who are trained and the people who aren't trained, and then there might be this world of awareness raising, which is simple slogans chucked at the entire population. But what I've really noticed happening more and more, and it's partly to do with I think the online space, but it's also partly to do with a big culture shift in people wanting to talk about this stuff, is those kind of more informal conversations about stuff that blokes are really interested in engaging with. And Banksia's been doing those kind of public talks, you're doing them online. What do you see as the value of that kind of training, which isn't a training program, but clearly it's not just chatting for the sake of chatting, right? You're being intentional about those conversations.
Yeah, look, we see the guys who come through the training program learn about vulnerability. They learn the strength of making themselves vulnerable in a supported environment, and it becomes infectious. We then there's this just feeling of support within the room. And Glenn, if I just have 1 minute, there's a part of our training course we cover listening. I can't emphasize this enough, and it's something that I'm poor at, and a lot of men are poor at. And as part of the course, we read a poem that Ray Horton wrote back in 1979. I don't know if you hit it, but if I can just have 1 minute to read through this.
Go ahead.
So please just listen. When I ask you to listen to me and you start giving advice, you've not done what I asked. When I asked you to listen and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you were trampling on my feelings. When I asked you to listen to me and you feel that you have to do something to solve my problems, you have failed me, strange as that may seem. Listen. All I ask you to do is listen, not talk or do, just hear. Advice is cheap, and I can find that myself. Not helpless, maybe discouraged and faltering, but not helpless. When you do something for me that I can and need to do for myself, you contribute to my fear and inadequacy. But when you accept as a simple fact that I do feel what I feel, no matter how irrational, and I can quit trying to convince you and get back about the business of understanding what's behind this irrational feeling. When that's clear, the answers are obvious and I don't need advice. Irrational feelings make sense when we understand what's behind them. So please listen and just hear me. And if you want to talk, wait a minute for your turn and I'll listen to you. So, yeah, I've said it 3 or 4 times. If I can just get this, we're there.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Steve, we'll come to you. So, how does your training work in your organisation, your project? Who is it you're training? How are you doing it?
Yeah, for starters, Glenn, you've set me up, put me after these two. Unbelievable. 2 people I'm in awe of. So, look, for us, I better explain, I probably didn't explain it well enough before. We run education awareness programs. So we've got our first one, which is Let's Talk, which is a really basic, relaxed introduction to mental health for the community. You can run it from community groups to corporates. And it's about engaging people around mental health, removing some of the fear and giving them tools that they can, have that light bulb moment with and use. And then we have Communicating with Care, which is a course that was written for us by my mentor, Liz Wyatt. And it's about effective communication and support skills for someone that may be in crisis. And then we have mental health first aid, which I know a lot of you are aware of and have probably done. So we do that as well. And look, mental health first aid is unbelievable. It empowers the communities with the tools to be able to understand, support, and then refer. And it's just fantastic. And look, I'll share this with you. In our first two we ever ran, and I think we've run over 40 or 50 now. In the first two we ever ran, we had 2 people support a suicidal person before they'd finished their course. That's how empowering this program is. So if you haven't done it, I recommend that you all do it. From an organisation point of view, at a base, our volunteers and our team have done the mental health first aid course, so they're mental health first aiders. And why we get them to do that is because we want to mitigate risk for the organisation, for the first aider or the volunteer, and we want to be able to support the individual that we might meet in the community. So one thing that we do find, we get invited to a lot of social events and fundraising days, especially those ones that are built around mental health. And on those days, you get an influx of people that are working through or living with maybe a mental health disorder, or have someone close to them that has a mental health disorder, and they're trying to support them through. Just like if you're going to go to a car show, people who are interested in cars enthusiasts will go to a car show. Those who may be living with or supporting someone with a mental health disorder seem to flow to mental health fundraising days and want to be a part of it and be around people that understand. So for our volunteers, when they do go out to volunteers at days like that, I try to have them all to have their mental health first aid at a minimum, just so that they have a good understanding of how they can support, and then local referrals, which is really key. Because just like the guy said, you know, we're not here to fix, we're here to support. And so if we can give them a local referral and pass them on, so that's really key. But like the guy said earlier, I'll go back to talking to men about supporting other men. And just like Jack and Ian said, you know, we start the conversation off really lightly. We say, how's this for a thought? You're not here to fix, you're here to support. And straight away with that comment, what it does, it removes an unbelievable amount of pressure. And the person can start thinking, all right, I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to know all the answers to fix this person, but I need to know how to support them. And then that puts them in the mind frame of, all right, how can I best support this individual to seek help? And that there is empowering in itself. We have this saying, education equals empowerment and safety. And then the person starts thinking, you know, how best can I support? Then we look back at, you know, well, what is support? What is the best way to support? And we talk about, you know, really listening, being able to, you know, remove, for men especially, we're fixers, as Jack said. We see something broken, we want to fix it. We see someone hurting, we want to fix it. So what we talk about is, look, let's think about, you know, what's friendship built on? What's relationships built on? They're built on trust and respect. And most men understand that, trust and respect. But, you know, you can build trust and respect with someone really easily that you've just met, just in the way that Ian said in that poem, by, you know, the art of, you know, effective listening and communication. So we talk about that with men, because men are easy to jump in and want to fix, as Jack said earlier. So what we try to talk about is, you know, to be an effective listener is, and communicate with someone that may be in crisis or needs support, is, you know, to remove these things that men jump to straight away, is judgment, their unconscious bias, you know, giving time, you know, as being a fixer. And this is we're in a room here with, you know, some really experienced mental health experts and community members that have a really deep knowledge on it. But I know for me personally, I still have to check myself sometimes when I'm having a conversation, because I want to fix, I want to help, and I can overrun. So I have to pull myself up. And it's something that takes time to learn that tool and that skill to be able to pace yourself. So we talk about the timing, the tone, removing that unconscious bias, understanding that we're not all the same, you know, same, but different. Removing that, it's something that I'm really passionate about, because, man, we over-identify really easy, and it's not because we're not listening, it's just we're trying to think of that solution once again. So we try to give them the steps of things to be conscious of to be an effective listener. And that's how we believe we can train people, you know, who are volunteers, but also the general community. So it's about understanding how to be that effective listener. I love that poem that you said, Ian. It gave me goosebumps, because, you know, that's the skipping rope effect that we have each time we go into a conversation about mental health. You know, a lot of guys are waiting for their turn to jump in on the skipping rope, and that poem gives us time to sit back and wait for our turn and to listen, you know, and then find that support. Another thing as well for men.
That's one, Steve. I hate to be the person to jump in at this point, with the skipping rope, but last point, please.
Oh, another thing is, the biggest tool that we can have as males, supporting other males, is referrals and understanding clear referral paths. Because, you know, we can see there, we can be there, but if we can help them, support them, get to clinical support, that's a massive step forward.
Great. That was really rich, Steve. Thanks so much. Well, I'll come back to you all, but first I need to come to John. Same question. You know, what are you guys doing in terms of training? Who is it you're training? What can you share with us?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I guess if you start at the start, we wanted to think, what do we want our vulnerable men and also our mentors, and sometimes they're both, to have in terms of skills and attributes. So I just want to come back to something that some of the speakers have talked about. You know, certainly, you know, blokes helping blokes. And for me, authenticity is the most important part. So what Ian said, you know, if they can care and they listen, brilliant, you know, that's really good. Also what Stephen said in terms of removing judgment as well, that's going to be a really important part. But also coming back to what Jack said, you know, this notion of not going into solution mode, very clear about your role and your boundaries, and the referral pathways and so forth are going to be important. So that's where we started. And one of the first things we did said, okay, what does practical workshops look like for blokes who hate that sort of stuff, hate sitting in a classroom? So we start all of our sessions throwing around a footy and just sharing a few thoughts about things. We swear quite a lot. And just on that notion of swearing, you know, when you said, you know, your wanker theme, I'm getting some ideas here, Glenn, that Maroubra, who had a chance to lube up, perhaps, I don't know, just a thought while we're talking about wanking. Getting that out of your mind very quickly, the first thing that we sort of do is say all of what we do is we encourage men who are challenged, as well as people that want to become mentors, mates that want to help mates, come into 3 2.5 hour workshops, outcome designed, touching on all that core stuff around vulnerability and turning off the struggle switch, you know, the Russ Harris stuff, and also looking at what stress is in their lives and how they deal with that, and perspective and vulnerability and forgiveness and so forth. We're also very much trying to hit on those situational factors. So the second workshop, we unpack a lot of the relationship skills using the John Gottman model of sound relationship home. We do some stuff on empathy and listening skills and tune into that, but we also give them some really practical skills on conflict. And then finally, the last one, you know, optimism and life balance. So all of our guys, they actually, you know, that's kind of the compulsory bit. They've got to come along to the workshops. And in fact, the last couple of months in COVID, we've run 10 workshops a month, and we've had a stream of guys that have come through and have got through all of that stuff. Once they finish that core stuff, we figure, you know, they've got some skills, they've been able to self-reflect, they understand some of the issues that they're dealing with. And then what we do is we get them into what we do, typically suicide prevention program. Now we're lucky because we're partnered with Wesley Mission Queensland, who are great. My oldest sort of commercial client, wonderful people. And so Glenn Warwick delivers the suicide prevention stuff, and then we do an induction program. But that's not where it stops, because what we need to do is we really need to make sure that these guys are really competent. So every month we have monthly coaching and group supervision sessions where we practice the skills of listening, asking appropriate questions, reflecting, getting out of your own way, you know, not talking about solutions or trying to fix it and all that sort of stuff. So we really have a very much a process-oriented workshop every month for the guys that are either advancing towards mentoring or are mentors there. And what's been really unbelievably good about that is the guys, and we've got a few here. Shout out to Shane and PK and Paul Baumgartner. You know, Paul came to our program in Bundaberg a couple of years ago and been a marvellous mentor for us. And one of the things that we find with the practice sessions, we have these experienced mentors that are helping out mates who can unpack some of the issues, debrief some of the issues. But the newer guys are learning a hell of a lot from their own experiences around sort of boundaries and all the rest of it. So that third component, that monthly stuff, is really helpful. And what's really, and we're very much the same like any organisation, you know, we're privately funded. We, you know, are the biggest donors currently, but we have a trek in the middle of the year to fundraise a bit. But one of the things that you need to think about with volunteers, how do you not just give them some skills and let them out to sort of hang on you know, to hang and not really be supported? So we've got area coordinators, obviously volunteers in each of the areas. So Bundy, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Lockyer Valley, and Darling Downs. And what those guys do is they check in with the mentors, they debrief, they get notes from them on what they've done. But also once a month we get together and catch up and really start to unpack it and make sure that we're just sharpening the saw when it comes to those skills around listening, reflection, and so forth. Key for us, having spent 20 years as a lifeline counsellor on the Sunshine Coast, is going upstream and getting to people, getting to men when they're struggling with those challenges, but not necessarily at that really acute level. Because really, we steer them back into appropriate professional help at that point. So we don't turn anybody away. We just sort of try and put them in connection with people that are helpful. But at the end of the day, we are looking for men that are struggling a bit, identified in the community, identified through primary health networks or psychs or doctors or anybody else in the local community, and then we go from there. And I have to say, in Bundy, my sister Andre Marcus's mum is probably responsible for getting half the blokes into those workshops, talking to mums and sisters and, you know, all the rest, and saying, hey, do you reckon they could come along to this? It's completely non-judgmental. It's really authentic, informal, but not only that, you're going to go outside and throw around a footy and have a chat to a mate halfway through the session. So it's not like going back to school, because that's pretty repulsive for them. And the other thing, last comment I'd make, Glenn, is that our mentors typically engage with our men that are facing life's challenges through an activity-based way. So we've got blokes that are doing surfing, we've got PTs that are doing boxing classes with them, you know, area coordinator down the Gold Coast doing lots of work, just going for long walks and so forth. Very rarely are we sitting over the table and eyeballing them, because that just gives a whole new informality and easiness to that process. And that's worked incredibly well. And the benefit of COVID, even though there's a lot of stuff that's not so good, is that we've been able to, we might get a referral in the morning, and we can get a mentor phoning that bloke that afternoon, setting up a meeting to have a chat to them. So it's bloody great in that regard, being able to fast track it a bit. And that's the great thing with being non-government funded to some degree, is that you can do what you like as long as you've got your risk governance stuff in place already. So that's pretty cool.
Awesome. Thanks, John. So there's kind of a thought bubbling in my mind as I listen to all of you. We've been talking about training in this sort of, you know, just generally talking about general training in this space, which, you know, loads of people are familiar with. But what I've really noticed is all of you in different ways are talking about how you deliver this training with an extra layer of awareness, which isn't in the training, which is an awareness of working with blokes. Whether that's that very specific stuff about checking the football around and swearing a lot, like John says, or whether that's just that thing of being aware of like the tendency to fix, like Stephen says, or the value of really listening, like Ian says. So I've got a question for you to chew on, see where this takes you. And let me give you some context for this question. So training around mental health and suicide prevention, I think one of the things that's really driving this broad grassroots men's mental health movement is this growing awareness of suicide as a social issue. It's that kind of broad, kind of top level, 3 out of 4 suicides are men, 6 men die of suicide a day, that kind of stuff, which is, we can all share on social media in a second. But underneath that, there's a desire amongst men to do something about that. And then when you look in the suicide prevention sector, 3 out of 4 suicides are men, but 2 or 3 out of 4 people working in suicide prevention are women. And that shows up in lots of places. And one of the places it shows up is in gatekeeper training on how to look out for someone who's at risk of suicide. And all the data I can find that ever looks at the gender of people doing that stuff says that about 70% of people doing that training are women, right? And so, and we know 2 things about that kind of training. In the right context, it can save lives, because in the right context, it can give people the skills to step in and have a conversation that actually prevents someone going down the pathway to suicide. Now, it doesn't always do that. Sometimes it's a little bit, there's a phrase that people use called train and hope. And so we just go into the community and do loads of training and then keep our fingers crossed, then maybe we'll stop suicide in our community. But what even that training does pretty much always is build the emotional resilience of the people that do the training. So even if it doesn't then result in them using it to save a life, it actually builds their own resilience to suicide. And so we have this tool called suicide prevention training, which is actually a really great even if you never use it, it's a really good protective factor. It reduces your own risk of suicide. And yet most of the people we're giving it to are women. And then there's another layer, which is most of that suicide prevention training doesn't wrestle with the subtle differences between men and women and how men communicate and how women communicate, which I get all of you have an awareness of in terms of how you're talking, because you're mostly working with blokes. Now, let me first be clear. This is blokes talking about blokes' mental health. Do we care about women's mental health and women's suicide? Of course we do. Can women play a massive role in helping to prevent male suicide? Of course they can. So this is not a men versus women thing. This is not about competing to get less women trained and more men trained. But do we need more men trained in this stuff? Yes. So I'm really interested to hear your reflections on what is it that makes training bloke friendly, both in terms of how you deliver the training, but also in terms of how you give people training that will work really well when they go into a conversation with men. I know, John, you've got answers to that because you're in the world of swearing and sport and all the rest of it already. And you've laid that out a couple of times. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think of another way of giving us insight that goes beyond what you've already said. And I'm going to come back first to, and that's, how do you work with masculinity, masculine norms? How do you actually engage men and get them through the door in the first place? How do you make sure that the training's used in a really effective way when talking with a bloke? You take it however you want to take it. There's lots of angles to take this from, but what is it that makes training bloke friendly that we can all learn from? And Jack James.
Glenn, you've just brought up a really great point that I find as well, that the training itself is a suicide protective factor. What I find when we run our trainings, we might put 20 blokes through it at a time. And by the end of it, we might only put 12 into a program. Quite often what we find is the people who, as in facilitating a program, the people who are putting their hand up to say, I want to facilitate, are quite often the ones that need the help. But the male ego gets in the way and they say, no, I'm fine, but I want to help others. My mental health's absolutely fine, but I'm really keen to help others, when sometimes that's a lot easier than them saying, I actually need to learn these skills for my own well-being. So I've found that to be a really huge phenomenon that we didn't predict at the start of our training sessions. You know, when we first launched Banksia, we said we're going to have 20 people, which means we've got another 10 growth rooms, where it's actually become really, really clear that a lot of the people who put their hand up to help others really need that intrinsic focus first. And so we quite often say, well, okay, the next step might be for you to facilitate, to attend a growth room for 6 to 12 months, understand what it's all about, and then, you know, that might be the next step to facilitate the program after that. But for me, and I'm really lucky, depending on how you see it, I fit the stereotype. I use the example, I used to play elite sport. I had 2 university degrees. I had great friends. I always had really strong girlfriends. You know, I was straight, white, well-educated sportsman who had great resources, and I still went through severe mental illness and suicidality. So I use that example in my programs, and I also try to really say, well, if that's the case, imagine how many people didn't have or don't have the resources that I had. But I also try and really personalize it. So for me, it's a very energy draining thing, because you have to read the whole room. You know, if you've got a room of 15 people, it's not just I'm presenting a lecture, it's engaging with those people, finding out what they want to learn. And so we spend, you know, half an hour at least engaging them beforehand to make sure they're the right fit for the program, understand their priorities, understand what they're expecting, and how we can facilitate their knowledge better. And for me, that makes it really important and valuable. But then a lot of it as well is bringing out the strengths of the room. So getting the guys to solve each other's, you know, answer each other's questions and problems and everything like that when appropriate. You know, if someone has a question directed at me, it's all about putting it back to the group, because, you know, not many people want to be sitting there for a day just being spewed words at. And then a lot of practical stuff. So as I said, you know, teaching a skill and then getting them to go and actually implement that as one-on-one or a group of 3 or 4, depending on what that skill is. So really trying to make it as practical and bite-sized as possible. And then to finish off, the last thing that I say, and anyone, I can say, I know Stephen Kelly was here before, but anyone who's attended our programs, I say it about 8 times every day, is the last thing I want them to do is be hungry on a volunteer training day. So I just make sure I load up on all good snacks, and all healthy, of course, to align. But, you know, there's nothing worse than you're sitting in a work training and your stomach's going off and you can't think about anything else. So I make sure there's too much healthy food for the day to keep them engaged. And I say, if nothing else, they've been well fed.
Beautiful. Thanks, Jack. Really interesting, that point you're making about people putting their hand up to help who also need help. Right? And, you know, I'm sure that's not unique to blokes, but it has definitely has a certain flavour with men. And you can look at that as a real strength as well. It's like, you know, that strength of masculinity, the desire of mates to help mates. You know, and one of the longest standing male suicide prevention programs is Mates in Construction. Now, I often say, with the lack of men, or the disproportionate amount of men who don't do, I've worded that really badly, the fact that not as many men do suicide prevention training as women, it's not because blokes aren't willing, right? It's because, you know, Mates in Construction, 85 to 90% of the people they give suicide prevention training to are men, and they train thousands of people, but actually target it in male-dominated workplaces. It's just that, you know, it's often being targeted into settings where blokes don't go. But the reason I raise the Mates in Construction is because the whole logic behind their model was blokes may not be great at asking for help, but blokes are usually really good at giving help. So let's train them to get better at giving help to their mates, and in the process, actually up their skills and their awareness in their own need to get help sometimes. So there's, and I think I don't know if you mentioned it already, John. It's something that you sort of mentioned to me the first time you spoke about your project, about how much easier it was to get men into training that was about giving help than it was about getting help. But we'll come back to you in a moment. So thanks, Jack. I didn't warn you with this question, so you've wrestled with that really well. I'll come to Steve next, then Ian, and then I'll finish with John. So Steve, you okay to jump in on this one?
Yeah. I'm a mental health nerd, so I can hang here all day. Look, I agree once again with what Jack said. So I train both males and females, and so I'll put on a community mental health first aid or communicating with care, and I see an even split. This is what I see, and I'll do training all over Sydney, but what I do see is when males are educated about suicide, are educated about mental health, have the tools, they wear it with a badge of honour. They become really empowered and they wear it with a badge of honour, like a sheriff badge. Hey, I now have the skills, I now have the tools to go out and support my friends. I now have the tools to go out and start the conversation, And how we change society, I see, is through our peers, friends and family, by having someone in that centre starting that conversation and normalising it. And if you have one of the friends in the circle that understands it, knows it, they pick it up. The friends start to pick it up, and so I'll do a let's talk for a group of guys, and I'll share an experience actually. So I'm on the Northern Beaches. I live on the Northern Beaches, and I did one for a construction mob. They got a lot of employees, and they're plumbers, they're chippies, they're electricians, they're architects. They all came along, and they all knew each other. And we started the conversation about suicide and mental health, and it turned out to be an absolutely brilliant evening of sharing. And I could see people looking at each other and nodding their heads. And then 2 days later, I get a phone call from a wife that I've never met before. And she said to me, Steve, you've not met me, but my husband came home from one of your talks the other night and he was white. And I said, what's wrong? And he walked into the bedroom and sat on the bed and said, look, I need to tell you something. I've been feeling suicidal for the last month or two. But I know I can talk about it because I know all my mates can talk about it. I saw them nodding their head. There's that approval around peers and understanding that you can be vulnerable and open up can be the key to really suicide prevention. Knowing that your friends understand, that this conversation can be had. I don't know if I've gone off track a little bit, but it was just a real powerful thing when you educate guys together in a group, and that simple nod of a head of acknowledgement can remove a barrier, smash a perceived stigma, and create an opportunity for the next person to go, all right, I'm able to talk now.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Really great, powerful story. Thanks so much. So, Ian.
So how do we encourage men to do the mental health training?
No. What is it that we need to do? What have you seen that works in terms of making that training more bloke friendly? What makes it bloke friendly? And that's either gets more blokes doing it, helps it go in.
Well, yeah.
Blokes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got it. So first off, since we've launched, we've always had more mentors than mentees. So the mentors, there's a bunch of guys out there. It's often described as the most fulfilling thing they've done. Just the desire to help another man in their life. So they're incredibly motivated. At the moment, we've got 30 or 40 more mentors than we've got mentees. So we cover mental health as part of our training course, but we also ask all the mentors to go and do the Lifeline course or the Wesley Mission course. They're both great. I saw Glenn, you put a note in there. And we have all of them do it. So how do we encourage them? We tell them, if you want to be a mentor in the program, you need to go and do this course, and then we get the feedback. So we've got a great relationship with Lifeline. They give us a big discount on the course. And the feedback we get from that, it's always been positive. Not one person's come away saying, well, that wasn't helpful. And I've heard, like just what Stephen was saying then, we've had a number of guys who've come back and they've actually used the skills within that to then get to the point of actually asking someone, are they thinking of suicide? So I believe as many people as possible should do this course, especially men, and it's going to save lives. And as you said, Glenn, possibly their own life or the lives of the people they associate with. So we're doing it by making them sound strong. But if they want to be a mentor in our program, they need to have done that or a similar course before we'll let them go down that path. And we fund that. Mentoring Men funds it.
Great. Thanks, Ian. And John, last but not least, how do we make training bloke friendly?
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, a couple of things. I just want to pick up on what the fellas have said, which is spot on. You know, from Stephen's perspective, I really love that comment about, you know, at the end of the day, how do we make it psychologically safe, if you like, for blokes to participate and then to be able to talk. And one of the things that I think is really exciting for me is when you get established guys in the group who go, oh yeah, I've had a really shit run of things and I've really struggled, and they're demonstrating vulnerability. So I think, you know, from the perspective of us as facilitators or the fellas that we're working with as volunteers who, you know, are skilled but mentoring others, if we can demonstrate vulnerability and not try and be perfect all the time and talk about our own shit and our own struggles and so forth, I think that's a really good starting point. Also love what Jack said as well about making it super practical, you know. So, you know, here's a concept, let's have a chat about it, let's chuck a footy around, go outside, find someone, tell them how you'd use that, you know, really practical. And food, absolutely. We just flood them with food, you know, food and good coffee and stuff. And coming back from COVID-19 in all of our face-to-face ones, starting on the 26th, we're just having a cook-up. I'm cooking bacon and egg burgers to start so we can catch up for an hour. And it's about that comfort, isn't it, and that psychological safety, so that, you know, men are okay to say that sort of stuff, and it's reinforced and rewarded. That's what we're here for. But I really think that sort of disclaimer that Dr. Zach Ziegler said in the Suicide Summit was fantastic, you know, where he goes, you know, where one of his clients said, and excuse the expression, fellas, but I swear a lot, you know, his client said, well, I can't read, if the woman had said to me, I can't read your fucking mind, I don't know what's happening in your head, but I hope this is a safe space. And if I'm speaking bullshit, call it, because I'm happy to stop at any time. You know, just keeping it super real rather than super technical. But, you know, if you've got your heart in it, if you're authentic and you want to make a difference and you're doing it for all the good reasons, that's the key thing. And I totally agree with what Ian said, genuine care, but also your ability to listen and not give answers. I love the idea of what Jack said about handing it back to the blokes. You know, I never answer a question if there's someone else in the room that can.
Great. So the question we posed, just as a conversation starter, and thanks, John, that was awesome, was, do you need training to talk to blokes? So I'm going to give you the 10-second one sort of like circle round, then we'll hear from the other people in the room. Steve, I'm going to come to you first, and then Ian. Steve, do you need training to talk to blokes?
Yes, I think you do. The answer is yes, because we need to be mindful of who we are and who we're talking to. And, you know, we need to step back and think about what we're there to do. We're there to listen and support. So yes, we do definitely need training. 13 seconds. Did it.
Yeah. Of course, Steve is available to deliver training at any time. So yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Steve. Ian, and then, yeah, go on. And then
I was going to say no until Stephen said yes, but I want to give a qualified no. As long as you have that ability to listen, as with the same message, you're not there to fix, you're not there to tell them, oh, don't worry about it, you'll get over it. As long as you're not stupid with it, you don't need training.
Just
as long as you can just listen. I recommend training, but is it essential? Probably not. That's it.
Yeah. So we've got a yes, we've got a no. Jack, which way you gonna go?
Look, I hate to split the barrier, but I think with all of us here, we're all in the space. We wouldn't be on this call on a Saturday on a long weekend if we weren't passionate and we knew how to listen and we knew how important it was. But I think when you're going out into your everyday public, I do think it's really important. I think you do need to have that training to give guys the skills they need to most importantly, know how they can help those individuals around them. And I can't remember who said it earlier, but the second factor of that is where they can take those people for the right support. because the analogy I use to summarize sort of what we say is, we're not doing open heart surgery. That is not what the Banksia Project's about. We are paramedics, keeping that person safe and healthy to get them to the specialist to do that open heart surgery. So I think it's really important that they do have the skills to keep that person safe in the here and now and get them to the professionals they need to execute.
Great. Thanks, Jack. We'll finish with you, John.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate that for me, you know, if I know myself well and I can understand myself well, I'm going to do better with others. So self-management sort of precedes, you know, helping others from my perspective. You know, it was a great question that came up on the chat room from Dan Young, who said, you know, lived experience is part of training. Absolutely. You know, our best mentors have gone through so much shit in their lives, not just relating to death by suicide, but, you know, breakups of marriages, addiction and so forth. Man, they are just so genuine and so authentic because they come from that place. So that they've got a lived experience, a lived empathy. And I think that's a fantastic starting point. But in saying that, we still have people that have been on our program for 2 years that haven't officially graduated as a mentor because they can't get out of their own way. They're trying to fix it, solve it, sort it, give advice, be experts. And that just doesn't work.
Got it. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to come to the room now. So remember, the way we do this is, Steve, you got a quick point?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, one of the things I do say is, look, you don't need to be a GP to have a real conversation. And that's what I completely agree with Ian as well. You know, you don't need to be a GP, you don't have a medical degree. But having the basic tools is always going to benefit you. Yeah, okay.
Great, thanks, Steve. So look, we've got about 5 minutes or so still to go here. We've covered so much territory. It's been really interesting and insightful. I've learned loads, both about your projects, your approaches to training, but it's also made me really think about how we approach training and development. So if you want to, see if we get some questions this time for the panel, but also take comments as well. So the way to do this is you hover over the bottom bar there, find the participants area, click on the participant icon, and then just raise a hand and your hand will pop up in a box in front of me here so I can see who's. I've got Dan Young. I'm going to go to you first.
Hi guys, thanks for having me today. I'm moving into the mental health space, but to be honest, I've been unsure about whether I go there or stay as a volunteer. Or I'm not actually a volunteer right now, but I can say you've definitely clarified for me today that I think my biggest impact will be as a volunteer and keeping my voice. And as John said, just keeping it real. I think that's an element that's lost in some of these trainings, is that it's so scripted that you're taking the human element out of these trainings. But I'd love to learn from you all. I'm going to put my email in the bottom. I guess my question is, approaching a wide group of blokes, what is your number one way to connect with someone, like instantly? Is there a proven method?
Great. Which of the Jack Jones?
For me, it's vulnerability, and I think John said it. It's giving them permission to be vulnerable by being vulnerable yourself, or allowing someone else in the room to do that.
Great. Ian, I'll come to you in a second. I'm going to say Wayne in the first session would say beer and wings. John might say footy and swearing. Ian is going to say something.
So I used to think it was sitting across the table over a cup of coffee, and I've realised now for a lot of men that's too intimidating. They don't like you to see the emotion in their eyes. And I think John said it before. Often walking side by side, metaphorically, like, you know, it's just you're doing the journey with them. So for many men, it's just the side by side doing some exercise in nature is a great way of getting that communication going.
Great, thanks, Ian. Peter Nisbet's got a hand up. Remember, put a hand up using the icon if you want to ask a question. Peter Nisbet.
Hey, thanks for letting me chime in. I just wanted to say thanks to all the speakers in this session. It's been really good. To answer the question from my perspective, I've put a few things in the chat, so I don't want to repeat myself too much for anyone who's read it. But I think initially the answer is no, you don't need to have training, but it certainly helps, and it helps if you want to have much better and in-depth conversations, and to take people on a journey to be able to get the help they need. But I still think there's a major thing there to be had for just having a conversation anyway with anyone who needs help straight away, whether you've had training or not. And if we can all do that a bit more in our general life, I think we'll be all much better. I was going to put a big plug in for the thing that I'm doing in regards to mental health peer work, and I think that's a great way for people to get even further training if you've got the lived experience and you want to take that next step from being a volunteer to being someone who's a professional, I guess, in the mental health space, using that lived experience in a structured way. And the one thing I was going to add in here whilst I'm talking, but I'll add in the chat box as well, is that if you happen to be in Queensland at the moment, TAFE Queensland is offering, in response to COVID-19, free training in the mental health peer work space under what they call a skill set, which isn't the full Cert 4 that I'm doing, but is still some of the courses that is free. And so that's online, but sadly only available to Queensland. So
Right.
I'll flash that in as well.
Yeah, if you post that in the chat box, if you haven't already, a link to that training, Peter, that'd be fantastic. Miles Protter. Thanks, Peter. Miles Protter, you got a hand up?
Yeah. Quick question. I mean, we do this thing here. We were doing a bunch of men's sheds that we call the listening shed. It's just like an hour and a half, real basic training and listening. It's a lot of fun and gets the guys laughing and listening and gets the guys talking because people are listening. I think the question I have is, how do you guys overcome that sense of people, a lot of men, they don't know what they don't know. And so they don't know what could be available. And how do you kind of start those little conversations?
Great. Who wants to take that one up from our panel? Steve Gamble, and then Ian.
I think you start, Miles, by just starting the conversation about, and if you start the conversation, it flows, because when you talk about mental health, you can have a lot of different directions it can take, but if you can take it along a path from understanding what mental health is and how many people it affects, where you remove, you build a base, and then it flows, that conversation flows to, understanding the signs and symptoms, to understanding where you can seek support and how you can seek support. And those conversations can be unbelievable for individuals, because they'll have each in different light bulb moments. They have a symptom light bulb moment, how many people it affects light bulb moment, or where they can turn to light bulb moment. So if you have a really general basic conversation about it, and you follow that path, it becomes really enlightening, and each of the people will pick up something different.
Great. Ian?
I'd love to see a campaign that changes the way Australian society, and particularly men, see things like vulnerability and seeking support. Over my lifetime, I've seen it successfully done with slip, slop, slap, wearing seatbelts, drink driving and things like that. So I think this is a huge issue.
Smoking.
And smoking. Exactly. Thanks, Miles. So if we can just change it, because we see what happens, and all the guys who've been talking today have seen the impact we have on people when they get involved in our program. We help change that attitude. And I think if we could do that nationally through a campaign, it's great. So we are trying to do that at a smaller level through our social media. We're looking at ways to just get men to see what it is we're talking about. I just want to give a shout out to Miles as to talking at our next men's forum on eldership in 2 weeks. So looking forward to hearing that as well.
Awesome, beautifully done. It's almost as if we planned it to collide in that way. Yeah, if you've got any events going on, do share them here. You've got a great community to share with. We've come to 1 o'clock, so I'll say thank you. That was a really, really interesting session. Thank you so much, Jack. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Steve, and thanks, John. Our next panel session is in an hour at 2 o'clock.